hallmarks.com, and then you'll find your way to benchmarking and you can download the report. It included a staggering 5,300 teams, 47,000 users from 15 different organizations. And as I mentioned, these are organizations that have opted in to participate in this benchmarking study. This is not a survey. This is not about a handful of people who participated. We've looked at how 47,000 people have interacted in 5,300 teams. By far the most of the data, we looked at what's happening inside the Teams icon on Microsoft Teams. So that's basically the channel messages. But what we found, and I'll just take you through some of the key highlights of the report, that members or staff are on average a member of 3 teams. Now, most of you that I've signed up for ComsVerse are probably Microsoft Teams pros, or I'm imagining that. And some of you might go, 3, I'm a member of 100 teams. I'm probably a member of too many teams. And that could very well be true. But remember that most people are actually really only a member of 3, and they're actually only active in 1. So your own perception of how much people are using Teams and how many teams they participate in may not actually reflect the wider sort of reality of what most people do. The other thing you should know is that the vast majority of teams, according to our benchmarking findings, were set up as private teams. So it's a place where people go, set up a team, and then invite some of their friends, mark them private, thinking that no one else really needs to know what we're working on. One of the things you probably have heard Microsoft talking about is how important it is for Microsoft to work as a hub. And we wanted to check that by basically finding out how often people are adding tabs in Teams, when they add an application to Teams. And we found out that about 70% of team sites had added at least a tab addition to what comes if you like, out of the box. So I think it's fair to say that it is true that Microsoft Teams is starting to become the hub of where you get your work done, since so many people, so many teams add tabs. We also do analytics for Microsoft Yammer. And one of the things we've always been wanting to find out is that what is actually the difference between Yammer and Teams. Some of you might be have been pondering about that as well. But what we found is that there's a very, very clear differentiation between how people are using Teams and how they're using Yammer. So, and it goes back up to that point I made earlier about the vast majority of the teams being private. Most of the team members are actually also coming from the same business units. So people tend to stay within a business unit in a private team, whereas on Yammer, we see much more open cross-company collaboration. So there are more open groups. The groups are typically a lot bigger, and they typically represent participants from many different business units. So there's a very, very clear difference between when Yammer is being used and when Teams is being used. Finally, in terms of high-level reports, there was a big variance between the teams that are doing exceptionally well, and then I can guess the ones we can call, average performers. So a big gap, and that means something important. It means that it basically allows us now to focus on what is it the best are doing, what's the gap, and how can we try to become more like the ones that basically had the best results. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about later when we get into high performing teams and what good looks like. Talk a little bit more about what some of those key numbers that we'd like to hit that'll take us up into the best performers. Now, these are the high level data findings from the benchmarking report. We did also do another thing. We asked a set of people that are experts at implementing Microsoft Teams what their experiences had been. And you can approach that in 2 ways. You can either ask, what are the best practices that we've done when you roll out Microsoft Teams, or you could be a little bit more cheeky and you can ask, what's the worst thing you've seen? Because some of that might stick more in your memory. So we did ask, what are those worst practices that we have seen on Microsoft Teams? And these are the 5 recurring themes that came from the organizations we spoke with. And they included consultants and implementation experts from Avanade, from Carpool, from Adopt and Embrace, from Enosis, and from Engage Squared. And as we summarize these findings, the following finding came out. As worst practices, so do not replicate this, right? Over formalize and over structure the Teams rollout. So you basically almost you're thinking too much about it. Allowing the IT department to dictate how to use Teams. And maybe that can be the situation where we've seen that, it's being treated Teams is being treated more like a Skype replacement. So that sort of sits in IT. Well, Teams is a lot more than calling, isn't it? So another worst practice, letting the IT department dictate. Some people just said, let's just replicate status quo in Teams. So, if we look at how we've organized ourselves in SharePoint or the network drive, with formal business unit structures, why don't we set up a Microsoft Teams and every business unit have a Microsoft Teams team and so forth. So use this as an opportunity to think about what would actually work for you. Another worst practice is saying, as long as we get the CEO and the COO and so forth, get them to run the flag high up, and then everyone else will follow. They're saying, nah, actually, that's not the case. For other platforms, that might work here. But for Microsoft Teams to work, we actually need to get the troops to use this. And that means that there should probably be more of a focus on team leaders rather than just relying on the CEOs to drive the change. Of course, we need the normal in terms of executive support, but just because the CEO is saying this is a good thing, it's just not enough. Finally, and I think my colleague, Laurence Lockley, I love the way he describes this, and he says, some people, they look at Teams as the thermomixer. That tool, the one kitchen appliance you need to replace everything else. And they're clearly saying, don't sell Microsoft Teams as the thermomixer of Office 365. There are other tools, and you need to position them correctly. Do not go on a sort of, on a replacement hunt. So we think these are really 5 things for you to consider for those of you that are in the middle of implementing or thinking about implementing Microsoft Teams. Now, in the beginning, I said, let's focus on what is it the best people are doing. What are they doing? What does collaboration look like when it really works for the Microsoft Teams? And to help us put that in context, we went out and said, well, maybe some researchers have thought about how high-performing teams collaborate on Microsoft Teams. So we trolled through the research and we looked at insights from Professor Richard Hackman, who is, I guess, almost the grandfather of research into team performance. We looked at Sandy Pendlet from MIT, who written a brilliant book called Social Physics, and he's even with I think it was a university colleague of his developed these called social badges that records everything you say and who you talk to, and really find out how teams interact with each other and what separates the strong performers from the average or the poor performers. Professor Amy Edmondson, a colleague of Hackman, I guess almost, I think she was actually a student of Hackman, wrote several books about psychological safety in teams. And it's another person we really leaned on in terms of understanding how does high-performing teams work. You can't really go past Stanley McChrystal, ex-US general, who wrote the book called Teams of Teams that I'd highly suggest you get a copy of and read. His research into team collaboration is very inspirational. Then there's Steve Denning, and we can't go even past. I know that Teams is from Microsoft, but Jeff Bezos from Amazon coined the 2 pizza rule, that a team shouldn't be any bigger than you can feed it by 2 people. So we looked very broad. We looked at I guess practitioners, thought leaders, and academics, and to find out what is the common themes that are coming out when we consult the research and try to find out what are the collaboration patterns for high-performing teams. If we can find out what they look like, and we can then start to look at those teams and what are their collaboration patterns and see how we can measure that, I think we put ourselves in a very strong position to start helping people become better at collaborating. And we actually allow ourselves to set some goals for what good looks like in Microsoft Teams. So what were the 5 key things what were the 5 key things that these people sort of agree on across all of them are hallmarks of great collaboration in great teams? Well, here they are. The first one is that the team is bound by a common sense of purpose. We know why we're together on this team. We know why it's been formed. We're working towards the same thing. This is something that they just about all agree on. That's a hallmark of collaboration, I guess, of forming a high-performing team. The next thing is about the size of the team. And those of you who know that in Microsoft Teams, there's almost no limit to how many people you can invite into a team from a technology perspective. But if you want to have a high-performing team, all the researchers, and this has been done way before there was anything called Microsoft Teams, have figured out that you should probably not have more than 10 people. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about actually some of there's some interesting research into what it means when you start to add more than 10 people into a team and how that impacts team performance. So stick to a limit. The way that the people on the team interact with each other. Everyone talks and listens in roughly equal measure. They also keep those interactions short and concise. And then the member leader, another hallmark. You might recall me talking about Amy Edmondson and her work around psychological safety. It's another one of the hallmarks of collaboration in high-performing teams. It feels like a safe place. I can go in and I can speak up. I can say what the problems are. There's no fear of sort of getting criticized or getting bumped off the team for speaking out about what's not working. And then the fifth one is.
Sorry, the events failed. It stopped.
All right. Do I
send live command? Just bear with me a second. I'm going to leave and come back just in case it's me.
I can hear you, Kai. It was going all right for me.
All right.
Hear me? I don't know if you can hear me.
I've just stopped sharing my desktop and I will share it again. Oh, hang on. I'll share the presentation. Mark, let me know if you think we are back in business.
I think we're okay. You won't have video, but the content should be there. I carry on, and I'll look back at the recording later, and if we do need to run this again, we'll sort it out so that it's a nice clean video. Okay.
I think I got up to the fifth of the 5 traits for great teams, that they don't focus on just working inside that one team. Remember, one of those key insights from the benchmarking report was that people are a member of one team, but they're predominantly active in just one. Well, the high-performing teams go beyond that, and they are members of different teams, and they actually go out deliberately sourcing and finding out what's going on in some of those other teams that they can bring back to their own team. So we'll talk a little bit more now about how do you actually measure that? What does it look like? How do we know if this is happening? So the researchers are saying that these are the great hallmark, but how do we know it's happening and what does it look like in Microsoft Teams? Let's have a look at that. So being bound by a common sense of purpose. Well, the first thing we expect is that you would have formed a team in Microsoft Teams. And when I say you form a team, it actually means that little thing you can see I've circled there. I've gone into the Teams area of Microsoft Teams, and I've clicked in there, and I've created the team, and I've probably named that in a way that reflects the purpose of the team. We go in there and we use the channels and the meetings, because that's where the team members are. What we do less of is that we don't just use chat. We know that chat is probably the first thing, chats and calls are the first thing that people do in Microsoft Teams. But here, chat is really only used for tactical coordination. And the real conversations about things that matter are staying within the channels within the team. Now, you can ask yourself, how on earth would we go about measuring that? Well, actually, I'm going to be talking about that because for the other 4 traits, there's some very clear indicators for how close you've come to good. And if you meet all of those, we suggest to you that means that you are probably bound by a common sense of purpose. If you are really talking to each other, if there really is psychological safety, all those things, it would be very hard to miss out on those and then being bound by common sense of purpose. So let me go to the next one. Not more than 10 members. This is pretty easy, isn't it? Well, actually, it's a bit hard because there's a real risk because it's so easy to invite more and more and more people. Oh, Mark needs to be a part of this team. He needs to know what's going on. Oh, Mary should be a part of this team. She needs to know what's going to be going on. But be really careful here. Avoid what we call team membership bloat. So make sure you invite your fellow members that really need to be in the team, but you need to start to understand the impacts of them. That team suddenly is not more 10 anymore, suddenly it's 15, suddenly it's 20, and there's a whole lot of people now watching, and the impact it'll have on all the old members in the team, suddenly having this whole sort of gallery of people that are watching what they're doing. So we strongly encourage you to don't invite these fringe participants. Use other tools, use Yammer if you want to have a stakeholder forum where you keep people updated about what's happening in your project. Well, maybe set that up for them rather than inviting them into this team. This team should be a very safe place for the team members to work. So this is actually pretty easy to measure from a SWOOP perspective. We measure how many, not just how many, you can see that in Microsoft Teams, how many people that are members, but also how many of them are actively contributing. How many of them actually contributing? So I've got some screenshots there. Number of interactive users, 91%. This is really high. There are only 11 members though, so very close to that, to that sort of cutoff point of about 10. And 91 of them are active. So that's really good. Now, for those of you that are interested in more research around this, try and Google the Ringelmann effect, and you'll be interesting to find articles about Ringelmann, who was a researcher. This is back in, he did an experiment in around 1913 or something around that time. So if you Google you can also Google the rope pulling experiment. And it's basically having a tug of war between 2 teams. And interestingly enough, the more people you add to each side of the rope, the less each individual pulls. Basically, it's suggesting that the larger the team becomes, the more the productivity drops for each individual team member. So this is again a very nice story to tell as you're trying to convince people to be careful about how many people you invite into the team. So number 1, bound by a common sense of purpose. Number 2, not more than 10 members. Number 3 is all about how we interact with each other. Remember, this is one way you said everyone on the team talks with each other in roughly equal proportion. They listen and they talk, and there's not a single person. It's not the team leader that everything revolves around. So what does that look like in Microsoft Teams? Well, we involve team members in the discussions. We post frequently, but we keep those posts short. So we don't take our email practices with us where we're used to writing long status updates month on month and then we drop them into Teams. That's not how you would work. You would be doing much more frequent and short updates. And you would also ensure that, as you would when you were having a conversation, you post and you also reply. Posting and replying. You don't just post without context. You might mention people, you might tag them in conversations, and you do it frequently. And you don't leave posts unattended, just like you wouldn't do if people were actually sitting together, co-located team. You'd make sure that everyone knew what was going on. So what does it look like? How could you possibly go about measuring that? Well, we have 3 different ways that we measure that in SWOOP. First of all, we generate for every team what's called a persona, a team persona. And the team persona, it basically sort of encapsulates how the team interact with each other. And I'll show you in a second what that looks like. We also look at the response rate. So how many of the posts get a response? And then we look at the mention index, which is a way that we can measure how often people are using @mentions to engage people in conversations and how effective that is. So this is what it looks like. if you look over on the right-hand side, you can see the team persona, and that little icon you're seeing, the 5 little dots with arrows between them. You get that sort of classification when enough of the people in the team are interacting with each other. If you had that situation where it was a team leader in the middle, and everyone just talking to the team leader, you find more of a sort of a hub and spoke pattern, and we call them a single leader team. Again, if you refer back to the researchers, and if you want to be a high performing team, it is the self-directed team that you're seeing over here that is the hallmark of success. Now, what in terms of the response rate, what should we be aiming for? Remember, we were saying that when you have a high performing team, people actually talk to each other. They not only post, but they also reply. They have conversations. So the way that we arrived at the 80% for the response rate was going back to our benchmarking study, the one that had the 5,300 teams in it. We isolated the teams that were most active, that had the best collaboration patterns, and we used that to set the target for what good looks like. So these are not numbers that we dreamt up overnight. It's based on the currently the biggest single research benchmarking study ever done on Microsoft Teams. So we're pretty confident that when we're saying you can aim for 80%, that is a realistic, it is aspirational, but it's a realistic goal to aim for. If it drops below 50%, you can start to see sort of culturally what the team would be like. If you post lots and no one really is responding, is that really because you're using Teams just to put updates up there, but you're not really trying to encourage discussion with the team members? And remember, the hallmark of a great team, everyone talks to each other. You can also see a network map that we got there sort of roughly right in the middle, and it'll show you a pictorial representation of the actual collaboration patterns of the people on the team. And you can even see over on the left-hand side